that, you know, hello, when that book fell open, uh, I think there was just something so instinctive to an overly imaginative loner child. And I think the first hook of looking at a picture in the dictionary of a man and woman surrounded by all these characters was, I can do that and do it alone. I don't have to deal with other children. I don't even have to deal with this, whatever this is. And that impulse and that attraction to the craft holds as true today as it did then. I was telling Kevin a story last night about when I left theater school. I went to a theater school, and in the first semester, at the end of the first semester, I was sat down by the department head and the dean, and they said, it was an evaluation, I suppose, and they said, all right, you're always going to play 5 years younger and 5 years older. You're obviously a white male, and you will never be the leading man. So you will always be the best friend of the leading man and the goofy best friend. So we want you to buck up your tap dancing skills. And they had said, there's your career. And it was a religious school. It was Brigham Young University in Utah, where apparently you do not say to the dean of fine arts, go fuck yourself. And then I left shortly thereafter, because starting at the age of 14, when I toured.
You mean that was a problem?
Yeah. Apparently.
I don't know why that didn't go over so well, but go ahead.
I know. And you see, I had already been a puppeteer for money since the age of 14 by the time I went to theater school. And I think my reaction to them saying, you're only going to be this from this range to this range was, I've already played Rapunzel, the Witch, the Three Pigs, the Big Bad Wolf, and Prince Charming, you motherfuckers. So don't tell me I'm not going to be the leading man. I'm going to be all of them. And I realized that I didn't want to be trained that way. And so that's when I, in my dorm room that night, wrote Bill Baird in New York, who did the puppets in The Sound of Music. That's what he was the most famous for. And I begged him. I begged him to save me. And I actually told him it was his responsibility to save me because I was the next generation. And he'd written this BS thing at the end of his book about how we must train the next generation. So I quoted him to himself. And then I met him in Moscow a few months later, and he got me to New York. So that was that early trajectory. And like I said, I think in one of the video clips, when I was in New York, the Muppets went boom. I worked for a woman named Bonnie Erickson, who was head designer at Muppets, and she made Miss Piggy. And so I learned from her how to make those style of puppets and did that for many, many years. I did all kinds of series and commercials and industrial films and stuff like that. But at some point, I was longing for the theater, and a lot of my early mentors from the age of 12 on were marionette people. And so at a certain point, I just had to do marionettes. Well, I wanted to go back to the theater with puppets, and I thought, well, what's new? What can I do in the theater that's new? Well, there's nothing new ever. But I realized something very old that had fallen out of fashion might be brand new for a modern audience, and that was marionettes. And around that time, all my mentors started dying off. And they had all said, never show yourself with the puppets, always be hidden, do it classically. And then they all died, and I stood in the open. So that's how that started.
I should add that I've seen from all these shows, there's so many different ways that Ronnie engages with the puppets. And it is true that sometimes he's in a traditional bridge setup where he's up above and the puppets are dangling into the space, and you can see him the whole time. That's true. He's always visible, but your eyes are always drawn to the characters. But there are also times when he has invented this whole world of puppets that are just amazing. He has all kinds of things that sometimes he's holding up close. He has little finger puppets, little things like the show that he just did in Toronto that I saw called Forget Me Not had. Oh, there it is, right there. Look at the size of that thing. If you can imagine. And he had the whole audience holding flashlights, and we were the lighting designers putting our lights on that while the little thing talked to us. I mean, you could have heard a pin drop, the level of focus that brings in. It's the size of your finger, for heaven's sakes. I didn't know anybody even did things like this. But so he doesn't just do marionettes. He does this whole world of things, you know.
I think what the gang might find interesting too is on that last show, the composer is my partner John Elkhorn, who's composed I think the last 4 shows for me. But it was a show that I wanted true, and it's so interesting, you guys, that I did this when I did, because you'll understand what's happening today, where we're not even allowed to assemble. The Canadian theater won't open until 2022. That's a fact. So it's going to be a long time. But that last show, I wanted to explore a true immersive experience with the audience, not a BS. You'll sit on the floor of a bowling alley and watch a play. That's environmental theater, but that's not immersive. And I've gone to a lot of immersive shows that don't need me there. They just put it in a garage and think it's cool. And I thought, if I'm going to do an immersion show, I really want the audience doing a lot of work. We spent 2.5 years building 120 individually sculpted hand puppets. Everybody during a ceremony gets their own hand puppet, so it's their other, and they respond as the mob, the crowd, throughout. They disappear at times. I take the puppets away. There was a basket of flashlights. You would have to light the scene, and I moved constantly, so the audience had to constantly move. If I was doing something over there, you'd have to physically get up and go over there, sit on the floor, stand nearby. But I think what you'll find interesting is for the music, to keep the interactive and immersive quality and the participation of the audience as central, we actually pressed all of the, we ended up with 18 music cues. We actually pressed all those individual cues on vinyl. And there was a record player station, and I would call Maestro Music, please. And anyone from the audience could go over, take the record, put it on the turntable, put the stylus on, and they were the maestro who was giving us the music. So that was such an extraordinary thing that I wanted to do. And I got fought all the way along. The composer fought me on that. My stage manager fought me on that. The production manager, it was going to be too hard, too expensive. Where are we going to get the records pressed? The audience is going to break things. They're going to steal puppets. And none of that was true, actually. What happened was it made the audience active through the whole time. Now, obviously, and it was for 100 people a night in a non-traditional space. Obviously, we don't even know if that show will ever see the light of day again, because of where we are. Moscow wanted that show for September, actually. We said, no, you have to understand, the audience is there, and Ronnie sweats on them and hugs them, and they put their hands in things people had their hands in the night before, and I didn't hear them, but I'm going to do it for you in a bad Russian accent, because I grew up on Rocky and Bullwinkle. But their response was, "What if we put the entire audience in hazmat suits?" I thought that was very funny. We declined their offer, but
oh heavens. Okay, let's just want to dig one more time back in this original thing, because this is part of what I'm so fascinated by. I often ask percussionists, when you first picked your instrument, you decided you want to be a percussionist. Did you have any idea of the reality of what you were signing up for? Because yes, you're cool. You're automatically cool if you play drums, and you're that part of that. But do you recognize that you're signing up for a life in which you will be 2 hours later than every other person on the stage when you finish, because you have to pack up all the gear and go home with it? Do you recognize it will affect your vehicle choice for the rest of your life? Do you recognize that if you're a persona non grata within the field and then you travel, you can't borrow the stuff that you need to borrow from all of these people around the world that make percussion happen? The culture of it is so incredible. And one of the things that I find amazing about what you do, is that you have so many different responsibilities and so many different parts of you that make you an artist, and they all have to be this enormous high level. I can picture this kid going, "Oh yeah, I'm going to be a puppeteer," but you have to write plays. You have to be a consummate actor. You have to be an inventor of ideas. You have to be an engineer of the mechanics of these things. You have to build sets. You have to be a painter. There are so many different parts of this, a woodworker, a sculptor. And I'm asking, when you were a little kid, did you have any idea that there would be all these different components that you would somehow have to bring all together into this one voice, and that each
Yeah.
one of them alone, just the sculpting of puppets alone, sounds to me like a life's work. Just forget performing, just making the damn things. I guess I just wonder how. Can you give us a sense of how old you were when you started to recognize kind of what you had done to yourself, and how does that make sense? Like how that you were going to have to invest in all these different things, and if any one of them had a weak point, that was going to show. They have to all be mastered. They have to all be super high level. And I don't consider engineering and acting to be the same skills. I don't consider being a playwright and being an actor the same skill. But in your hands, they're all of one voice. Can you just fill us in on how did you make a mental decision? I'm going to do all of these things at this level, and did you know what you were getting into? I mean, was this 7 or 8 when you had the puppet book fell open? Is that when it happened?
7, yeah.
Can you help fill in my mind
Well,
of disbelief here?
I think that was part of that original appeal, is that it appealed to that odd little boy who liked performing and who liked making up stories and liked making things, and usually preferred to do it on his own. So I did kind of get it. And I started finding my mentors when I was about 12 years old. Where is this book? It should be right here somewhere. There it is. Now, I signed up for a thing when I was 12. This sounds so dorky, you guys. It was the Stevens Correspondence Course in Puppetry. And for $30, once a week, you would get a brown envelope with a typewritten course outline, and it covered everything from vocal production, playwriting, puppet design, carving, jointing, how to build a stage, how to write a contract. And I took that when I was 12. And the last session, you wrote your own questions to Martin Stevens, the guy who wrote it, and he would write session 20 for you. For me, I didn't allow session 20 to end. I think it was 2 years later, I met him at a puppet festival, and said to him, I have Easter break. I'm coming to live with you for 2 weeks. And that's how I introduced myself to mentors. I never asked, I announced, which is pretty bold for a shy child. But I knew that these people had information I needed in order to keep moving. And no way were they going to deny me. What's interesting is the Stevens Correspondence Course was republished recently as a volume that my friend Lumen Code published. And I honestly tell young puppeteers, get this. Some of the materials are out of date. Some of it's a bit of its time. But my vocal technique came from the session on voice work in here. I mean, it's changed and adapted over the years, in other training. But this course taught me the basics of what I was getting into. So that thrilled me. I think I became a playwright by accident because I was making puppets and wanting to do shows. So therefore I needed them to say something. And so I just started writing shows for them until I was well into my career, and Theater of Marionettes existed. The first 4 shows of Theater of Marionettes set the style that I thought I was going to work in for the rest of my life. They were large, campy, outrageous musical comedies for marionettes, and they were very successful. That's when I was called the bad boy of puppetry. I was cheeky and singing dirty show tunes, and one was called Awful Manners. It was Gothic. One was Fool's Edge. It was a commedia musical. One was Virtue Falls, a Victorian melodrama, that operetta that we wrote. And I thought that was my career. I thought that's what I do, until one day another book fell open, and it's one I've had since I was a kid, Bill Baird's Art of the Puppet, which is a beautiful look at the history of puppetry. And I had read it many, many times. And it's that thing of you've read some information, but it doesn't resonate because you're not at the right place in the right time. I was in my late 20s, living in Alberta, the rise of the Christian conservative political movement started. AIDS was hitting the community full force, the first wave. So I was going to 3 funerals a week. I never wanted to be politicized. I never wanted to think that way, but the time I was living in politicized me. And I was certainly living in a place where it was very extreme politically. And I opened Bill Baird's book one day, and it fell open to a couple of paragraphs about Czech puppeteers during the time of the Nazi occupation in World War II, and how over 100 Czech puppet workers were sent to the death camps because they were doing illegal underground shows called the Daisies or Forget-Me-Nots, depending on the translation. And the main shows done by a guy named Skupa, Professor Skupa, who is considered the greatest puppeteer who'd ever lived in the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, was doing shows on behalf of the Nazis. They commandeered him, but he was so clever that he worked so finely with allegory that the Nazi censors didn't know what he was saying, but the audiences completely understood what he was saying. He had 2 beloved characters. They still have a theater in Prague named after those characters. And they did a show called Carousel on 3 Floors that the Nazi censors approved. And it was basically about a rooming house and these charming characters that lived there. And suddenly a loud neighbor from the east moves in and takes over all of the food and all the rooms. Well, the Czech audience knew that that was Germany, obviously.
And the idiots couldn't figure it out. They couldn't see it. Boy, that's
so when I read that, guys, it changed my life. It was, like Kevin talked about Providence changing his. It was a jaw-dropping moment of realizing that there was a nobility to my craft that I had not hooked into with all the Muppets and musical theater songs I was doing. And that's when I sat down and wrote Tinka's New Dress, which was a fable about puppeteers going underground. And the set was a carousel as an homage to Carousel on 3 Floors. But I remember when I wrote the first draft and finished it, now I'm getting emotional. I sat in my studio and sobbed for a day because I thought, I have just ended my career. I'm going to do something personal that matters to me, that's political, and it's not funny. And oh my God, Ronnie, what are you doing? And I did it, and it gave me my career. It gave me 8 years of international touring, all kinds of awards, all of that stuff. But, a friend of mine saw it when it premiered and said, Ma, you've changed your style. And I said, no. I found my style,
found it.
Finally. And I had to go through all those years of hand puppet shows in malls and the armed forces tours and TV commercials and flapping mouth puppets. I had to go through it all to find my one true love, and I've stuck with that. Now, Kevin, we talked about a thing last night and I got off track talking about doing all the aspects of the thing. So you're musicians. And so it would be the equivalent of you saying, I want to be a violinist. And the mentor that you write a letter to says, that's great. I'm so glad you want to be a violinist. So go make a violin and make sure it's a Stradivarius. And then you come back and say, look at the violin I made. And that mentor says, well, that's nice. Did you write the music you're going to play? And they send you away. And then you have to write the music you're going to play with that thing. And then you come back and say, I wrote the music and I wrote the violin. And they say, can you play it? And you're like, I'll see in a few years. That's the equivalent for you guys. If you had to build your instrument, write the thing you're going to play, and then study, because that was my mentor. Every time I wrote him a letter and said, here's pictures of the puppets I just made, what do you think? He'd go, that's fine, change this, work on the ears. By the way, who are you studying dance with? I'd be like, what? He's like, you got to study dance. So I'd study dance, and then I'd write him 6 months later and go, by the way, I'm studying dance and I'm doing this. And he's like, great, who's your vocal coach? Who are you singing with? And I'm like, oh, come on. So he was constantly throwing me back saying, No, I don't want to talk about chisels today. I want to talk about your vocal range. Are you taking ballet only? Because really, just one style of you know. So he was relentless in sending me back to the drawing board constantly, and I'm so grateful for that.
Well, this is one of the things I wanted to ask, in our field, which is so separate. The composers compose, the violinists make, they play the violins, the luthier they make the violins. We don't do this. Did it ever occur to you that, were you even tempted to say, I'm going to take an existing play, an existing script, and then I'm going to use that one, or I'm going to have somebody else make the puppets, or I'm only going to do the acting piece, or I'm going to write this and then have a different puppeteer do it? I mean, did it never cross your mind that just maybe you would, I don't know, involve other people and farm it out in some way? Are there any puppeteers who do that, or it's just simply not part of the tradition of puppetry? They all write everything, they all build everything, they all do it all themselves. How does that work?
Well, traditionally, yeah, that was the touring puppet show. You made it, you performed it, you schlepped it, and so that is where I come from. It's not so much these days. I mean, a lot of young puppet artists don't discover the form until their mid or late 20s, and they come to me and say, teach me how to be a puppeteer. And I'm like, oh, you should have started when you were 10. But yeah, it's almost like they don't want to catch up and learn it all, because it has become a thing of I'm teaching a design course next fall, and it's just for designers designing for puppet theater. It doesn't include the performers. I just want theater designers to know how to design for puppet theater, because it is going the way of that. And in Australia and England, in college courses, you don't build and perform. The performers and the creators go to their puppet builders and have a discussion, and the puppet builder does it. But I actually like doing it all, because it's a perfect job for a megalomaniac, right? I mean,
and was it your sense that nobody else would do it well enough? I mean, I can relate. I understand. It may not be true in my case, but I often feel like, no, every time I ask somebody else to do it, it's not the quality that I'm looking for. I got to do it myself. And so I just throw myself in. Is that the feeling that you had, or were you better balanced than me?
I think because the processes are so enmeshed now, the lovely thing about all these different jobs, I'll tell you the downside of all these different jobs first. When I'm on stage at night and something doesn't work, or something goes awry, or the reaction is not what I anticipated or what it had been before, what is going on in my head? Well, I'm still talking. You saw that clip from Penny Plain. I just talked the whole time. But in my head, the designer is saying, see, I told you we should have designed that another way. And the producer is going, no, you over-designed that. And the playwright is saying, you could have maybe just read the line better. So I have 4 people in my head blaming one another of why that didn't land. So that's the downside. But the good side is I get to waft between many different groups, which I don't know other people do. I get to hang out with playwrights because they see me as a playwright. I get to hang out with Canadian theater designers 100% as one of them. Actors let me sit in and talk about schmacting. I can go into the costume department and I'm seen as a costume designer. I can go into the scene shop and go talk to the painters because they go, oh, Ronnie's the scenic guy. So I get to float around the performing arts like a lot of people don't. And that's fantastic for me. That is the great joy of all these things. But because I'm a playwright, I write like no playwright I know, because I know the guy who's going to be speaking it. So I write aloud. I talk to myself aloud. I'm setting the rhythm. I'm trying to find the voice. When I'm sculpting a head, I'm doing the voice. And I have a rule that if I can't do a voice while I'm sculpting that head, no matter how nice that sculpt is, it's not the character. It has to be me talking aloud while I'm doing it. So I don't know a lot of designers or writers who have the advantage of that. I know a lot of writers, I'm sure like composers, who nervously give their scripts to a director and actors because they're probably going to mess up the timing or not see that that's a semicolon instead of a colon. You know what I mean? I get to create the show the whole time. So what I'm saying, Kevin, is yes, I have to carve 80 legs if there's 40 characters, and I have to make all these heads and all these molds for months and months and months. But for me, it is actually rehearsal, because I'm considering what the puppet has to do. and how they're going to act. And a Penny Plain, there were 4. So I knew on this version of Penny Plain, the first one, she had to kneel, get on the ground, and lay down. So that affected her knee joints and her hip joints. So I was rehearsing and making those decisions while I was building the instrument. So maybe you should all build your own violins, you know?
That would work. I'm just not sure if anybody can, if they can really process what you're really saying here. But I mean, you think about what he just said about building this. I knew she had to get down on her knees, so I built the joints this way. And I mean, this is a level of craft that you just don't see. I put a couple of quick pictures in there because Ronnie reminded me of something. I want to tell you guys a story. Can you just pull up those 2 pics that I just pulled in the chat window? Do you see the sort of crazy guy with all the hair? This is Lloyd. Lloyd is from 10 Days on Earth, that show that I told you about. And I want to tell you a story quickly of what remains in my mind the most astonishing moment in art I've ever experienced. It came at the hands of this character. Lloyd is more or less sort of a William H. Macy on Shameless kind of guy. He's like constantly out there barking about what's wrong with the world. He's usually drunk. And you know, if you just wander by, he's sort of like that guy. Like, wow, what happened to him? He's lost his damn mind. You know, he's just a nutcase. But he is actually a very sincere soul, and he has this friendship with this adult mentally challenged guy that I told you about named Daryl. You can see the 2 of them in this one picture. They see each other from time to time, and of course Daryl is completely non-judgmental and just loves Lloyd for who he is, you know. And well, this one night, I think it was the last time I saw 10 Days on Earth, so I had seen it many times, and I knew what was supposed to happen in this scene. Lloyd goes out, and he is drunk as a skunk, and he's proclaiming the end of the world and X and Y, and he's shouting, you know, like these people you sometimes see do on the street corner. And he's yelling this and that and the other. And then at the one moment he falls down, and he essentially falls into his own pile of vomit. You know, it's not his proudest moment. He falls over in the street on the curb and yaks on himself, as these people sometimes do. And when he does, apropos to Ronnie saying something didn't go as planned on stage. Well, something didn't go as planned, because when Lloyd gets back up, his arm had gotten stuck like this. I mean, so here's Lloyd with his arm, the puppet is just stuck like this. Now, I've seen this happen with Ronnie's puppets many times because, you know, you've got 700 or 800 strings on the stage. There's all kinds of little things that can go wrong. Sometimes the joints, and I can see him kind of jiggle it and get him loose and stuff, and he sort of works that out. This happens probably every night that something gets a little stuck or whatever. No big deal. But this damn arm would not come down. I could just see him working it. It just wouldn't. And so there's this, and the audience you could see was getting kind of weirded out by like, what's he gonna do? Does he know the arm is stuck? Is this gonna wreck the scene? What's happening? And I know that he could feel this, and this is part of what we're gonna talk about, is the way he works with the audience. So Lloyd plays out the rest of the scene with his arm straight up in the air like this. I mean, it just makes no sense. And he's talking, and he and Daryl are having this chat, and this goes on for like 5 minutes. And at the end of this scene, Lloyd turns to Daryl and he says, well, I gotta go now, baby. He called him baby. He said, I gotta go now, baby. And he said, I don't think I'll be seeing you that much anymore. And we know, because we know where we're at in this show, that Lloyd is probably gonna kill himself. We just have this sense that like he's gonna go, maybe drink himself to death or throw himself off a bridge or whatever. So he's saying goodbye to Daryl. And he walks in the corner and he said, goodbye, baby. And he said, I don't think I'll see you much anymore. And all of a sudden, Ronnie, sorry, just getting emotional again. So Ronnie improvises this line. And Daryl says to Lloyd, he goes, is it because of your arm, Lloyd? And like the audience is laughing, you know, because it's totally ridiculous. His arm has been stuck up like this for 5 minutes and we've been waiting for something to happen. And then Lloyd looks at Daryl and he says, no, baby. It's because you're the only one who noticed. I mean, he did that on the fly. He made it up right there. It was a one-time occurrence. I have never in my life seen any shit like that before. I've never seen it since. I couldn't believe it. He took the audience's laughter, which of course, as you know, when the audience laughs, that's when they're the most open. You know, they're like, oh, ha, ha, ha. And that's when the trained, you know, theater person turns the knife and sticks it right in. And he did it on the fly. You know, and I assume that probably a lot of the people that night thought it was scripted. They thought, oh, that's how it goes. That's why his arm was stuck. It was a total accident, and he turned it into the greatest moment of theater I've ever seen. You know, I've never thought, I've never forgotten it. You know, and I want to say, this is the type of thing that cannot happen if you aren't prepared. You know, you go out, you worry about playing your concerto from memory and X and Y and Z, and something goes wrong. Something always goes wrong. Something always goes wrong. And you cannot be so ill prepared that when it does, you can't recover. If you spend the rest of your time thinking about that, guess what? You're going to forget the recap. You're going to come in the wrong key here. Shift. The shift isn't going to go away. You're probably going to drop the bow. You just can't fall to pieces. And it's the preparation that allows you to be able to do something like that, you know? And to say the least, as you can imagine, when it takes him a couple of years to build a work like this, he's definitely prepared when he goes out there. So, okay. Let's talk about the audience for a moment.
Yeah.
And your relationship to them. This is one of my favorite subjects. I'm sure that the students in the orchestra have heard me lament about how distant I think that we are from the audience, and that we don't talk about them enough, we don't think about them enough, we don't connect with them enough. So many times, you know, I work with a person who's, let's say, for example, a student has won a concerto competition, which is a big deal, you know, and they practice for years, and they finally are at a level where they can win a concerto competition, and they get to go out and play a solo with the orchestra. And very often at that point, it's got a kind of head down quality. You know, they come out and they're like, and then they play, and it's almost as though they're playing for themselves, you know, like, how did it go? Oh, I nailed that shift in X and Y and Z. But the connection with the audience, the sending it to them, the feedback, the two-way part of it, I find is so often missing. And I think that's true in a lot of our profession. In your work, that is unimaginable. You couldn't do what you do if you just performed and invited people and we got to sort of witness it. You were over there and we were just watching you do your thing. You are with us in a way that I have never experienced. And your life, as I was thinking about this question, your life is largely two extremes, is it not? You are on the road performing with people. There's people every night, hundreds of people, new batch, new batch, new batch, new batch, new batch. And then when it's done and you go back home at the end of a run, you're alone. You're totally alone in your studio. You're making these puppets by yourself. Sometimes that goes on for 2 years. So it's 2 years of hundreds of people every night, and then it's 2 years of no one. And this back and forth is just the most interesting life. I mean, if you really think about what that involves. And I guess I just wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about breathing into the audience, what they mean to you, the degree to which connecting with them influences your work and your thinking. I mean, it's clear to me it's the whole thing is getting it to us. But again, we work in a profession where the audience is sort of out there past the fourth wall. And I feel like with you, you bring us right up on the stage. And I wonder if you can just talk to us about what that means and how you became vulnerable enough to do it. And when you started to get feedback, I guess that's a good question. When you started to get feedback as a performer that you were onto something, that you were bringing them up on the stage with you and you were really connecting with them. Can you give us anything on this whole issue?
Like any journey through technique toward artistry, you know, I've often said that if you're fortunate enough to have reached a midway point in a career, say 40, 45, that's a study of technique, repetition. And then you get to play for the rest of your artistic journey with interpretation and artistry. When I was in my 20s, I was like the young performers that make me smile and who I cook for. I felt I had to tell the audience everything because I figured it out and they knew nothing. So I kind of soapboxed, and a lot of the early shows were overwritten in ways because I didn't assume the audience had a frame of reference coming in and they needed to be told because I'd figured it out. There's that bad boy of puppetry. What I know at this point, and I'll tell you a lot of the in-between stuff, what I know at this point is I finally, thank God, figured out that an audience who will pay money to go sit in the theater, certainly to watch a puppet show, an adult puppet show, know what love is, know what longing is, know what jealousy is, know what rage is, know what loss is. The entire world, when the theater opens up, we will all know what isolation is. So I don't have to write a play about isolation or tell them what it is. I can now start from a place of assuming the audience has the same vocabulary as I do. And it saves so much time of explaining. It was about 20 years ago, and I had first met John Elkhorn, who is a jazz musician primarily, but a composer as well. And I knew nothing about jazz. In fact, I was one of those people who said, I hate jazz, so tell me what jazz is. And he said, okay, in a nutshell, and I'm paraphrasing John, and he would probably say it far more eloquently, but he said, in jazz, we honor the text and we improvise with the melody. So lyrics are sacred in jazz to most people. And I was doing a run in New York. I had a long run. I had a 9-week run of some show in New York, Street of Blood, I think. And I was frustrated in the first weeks of that run because some nights the audiences were here, some nights they were down here. I wasn't getting the reactions I needed out of them. It had to be the same show every night. I used to believe it had to be the same show every night because I'd rehearsed it. They were at fault. And one night I walked out on stage and thought, okay, let's pretend this is jazz. They're down here. I'm going to go smooth, baby. I'm not going to yell at you. I used to yell when they were quiet, thinking I would wake them up. It's the exact opposite. I played it smooth. I have one job. I have to tell that story, use those words, and get you out of the theater at the same time every night. So I'm driving the car. It doesn't matter how loud the muffler is, or if you want, if you want to rally race the thing. I can speed it up or slow it down or say it softly or say it loudly as much as I want. The other thing I learned is the first time I went to Europe, I went to what was then East Germany. And you're going to love this, to a town of 25,000 people. They had invited me to come with a big show for one performance because they get so much funding. They could afford to bring me over for a week and do one performance. And I had a crew of 3 with me. But in that town of 25,000 people, get ready for this. They had a state opera. They had a state theater that hosted me that employed 300 people. They had a ballet company. They had an orchestra. They had a full acting company in a town of 25,000. Yeah. Yeah. But so I did my show, and it was all English. And there was a written synopsis for them. There was that handed as the program thing. But I realized in the first 10 minutes of performing, I realized I was leaning into intonation and that they were responding. They were responding to the sound of the text, not the words of the text, because love sounds a certain way when it's intimate, and anger sounds a certain way when it's confrontational. It sounds different when it's siblings or when it's partners. And I was playing the intonation through the whole show. And there's a point in the show where the audience normally would yell out to a character, which is always amazing. Adults will yell to a puppet, I love you, instinctively. There was a point when they yelled, I love you, in German to the character. And I went, well, isn't that interesting? I just learned something about the audience. So I started playing with that when I got back to North America. And I figured out a way to make the audience start breathing for the puppets. Because what I do, everyone, is I'm like you. I jiggle the instrument. I'm akin to the violinist, but I still need the damn puppet. We all work with instruments and perform them. So and mine are on strings. So for the string players, we're practically cousins in a way. But I realized that I wanted the audience to, I could always tell because I was in view. I could tell within the first 5 minutes, people are doing this. Oh yeah, he's up there. Oh yeah, his mouth is moving. Huh. Oh, that's the control. Huh. And I feel the audience doing this for a good 5 minutes. And then I can actually sense when most of them just go.
Right.
Until I need them to look at me again. And I go, yeah, lights up here, or bleh, now look at me. So I've been feeling that. And what I do, especially with a character named Edna Rural, who sits in a chair, and all the puppet books will say, never, ever walk a puppet on stage, sit it in a chair, and have it talk.
You do that all the time.
Edna Rural does it for 23 minutes a night during the Daisy Theater. But what Edna will do, and I learned this, and this is not voodoo. This is not high magic. This is not anything but technique. I learned that if Edna is going to confess something, like, and that's when I said to my husband, I can never do this. The audience leans in, and you just did it, holds their breath for the confession. And on that hold, everyone's holding their breath. And on the confession, everyone exhales and inhales in unison. And for that magic moment in the theater, everybody breathes together and therefore breathes for the puppet. And it works every time, every time. That's not me lighting incense and sage, guys. That's me figuring out a technical thing of how to get the audience to breathe with me. Because there are, in the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, there are at least 5 major theater schools, all of some repute. I know that at least 2 of them currently are teaching their theater students that the audience does not matter. We will not even discuss the audience. So I think I'm being pretty calm telling you that, because I just want to cut a bitch right now. But I'm the complete opposite. There was a period within the last, I think, 5-6 years. I told Kevin last night, I peek at the audience every night. I am such an amateur. I get in places in the wings earlier than anyone I know. I have a whole ritual I do. I'm big on rituals. I get to the theater earlier than anyone I know in the theater. And because I'm on tour, I have to have those rituals and those control things, because the minute I walk on stage, I have no control. So I have to have all these rituals to pretend I have some control in all these houses I'm a guest in. And I peek at the audience, and I'm usually on a headset with somebody in the booth, and they'll go Ginger Bear, row 3 aisle, and we're looking at the crowd and trying to sniff them out. And I remember one Saturday night I peeked and I thought, oh, please let them be good tonight. Please let them be good. And in that moment, I realized I think that theater held 220 people. I thought, these 220 people have had a day. They've had a long day, a long work week. They've either scarfed food quickly or they've gone out for dinner and made a thing of it. They've spent $80 each for a ticket to a puppet show. None of them want this to fail. They've showed up for this to be the greatest night of their life. And I thought, these people for the next 2 hours are my best friends on the planet. And that's when my view of the audience changed, because they come so emotional. They come desiring magic. Even on a night when we show up with the fiddle or the puppet and go, oh my God, I shouldn't have eaten that burrito. I do not feel good. And I drank so much last night with Kevin. I am really hungover. Fuck these people. I don't want to do this show. But you've got a full house of people going, I need music. I need a story. I need you to cradle me and tell me a bedtime story. And once I figured out the audience's desire for what's being presented, I can't wait to. I wrote a thing and posted it on Instagram this week, because on March 1st, which was 2 days ago, on Monday, I acknowledged that was a year ago to the day when I did my last performance. I didn't know it was my last performance. It was 1 year. And I wrote quite sincerely about how I ache for the audience. It is like, I called it phantom limb syndrome to a friend recently. I imagine it's what being widowed feels like. If we had moors in my neighborhood, surely I would be wafting on them right now. But I miss the audience, because that's who I make the work for. I don't actually make it for me anymore. My whole view is, I'm terrified of that big world out there. So I shrink it and I examine it in miniature. And then I take it on the road and say, here's what I think of us. What do you think of us? in this context.
Folks, I mean, this is what you do. You hang out with people like this, and then you become a better artist. I mean, can you believe the shit this man is saying right now? I mean, is there anybody here in my care, and I almost don't want to know if you do, but is there anybody here that honestly believes that what Ronnie is talking about has no application for us? It's like, oh, that's fine. That's for a puppeteer. But when I play, I just play the muse. I just play the notes on the page. I go out and play the concerto, play the thing, and then I'm done. Like, do you really believe that it wouldn't be better if each and every one of us went out on the stage hoping that we could have collective breaths with the audience? Do you really believe that it wouldn't be better to go on stage, have a plan about the music, and then recognize that the way you're playing this passage, you can feel it. The audience isn't doing it. So Ronnie says, so I decided to go smooth, and then I brought him with me. I have done this. I have finally gotten to a place where, as a performer, whether that's as a singer, actor, or as a conductor, where I can do these kinds of things some. I can't do them at the Ronnie's level, but I can do them. I respond to those moments and I conduct differently because I can feel where the audience is at. I'm at least trying. This, of course, is the baseline of jazz. The conversation of a jazz musician is always with each other and the audience, and they're always responding to that. Do you guys really believe that classical music profession benefits from a head down, I'm just going to play it the way I always play it mentality? It's not possible. People want to fix the classical music, and you want to talk about ways that we can decrease the so-called distance between us and the audience? This is it, right here. Go out there for them. Imagine saying to yourself, I ache for the audience, like a phantom limb, like being widowed. You know what you hear classical musicians saying they're looking forward to? Carnegie Hall. The space. I want to play at Carnegie Hall. It's not the people that come to Carnegie Hall. Carnegie Hall. I've arrived because I'm performing on that stage. I saw Ronnie play at the Kennedy Center. I think it was Penny Plain, wasn't it? Isn't that what you did at Kennedy Center? I saw Ronnie play Penny Plain at the Kennedy Center. That's an enormous venue. That's one of the world's great venues. Was it any different because it was there? Of course not. I walked in, Ronnie comes out, he cared for me with the same level of individuality that he did every other place. It doesn't make any difference where you're at. It's about those people in the room. And anyway, I just hope you guys are getting this. It's just astonishing. And when you see it play out on the stage, it's quite something. Okay, would you introduce us to Penny here and tell us a little bit about why she's with you and so forth? You said you had a little something that you might want to share with us today, and this would be a good time because I need a moment to just sit here and kind of get my act together because I'm kind of emotional about all the stuff you just said.
Okay. Well, I certainly don't want to make this about puppet building, but I thought I'd give you a really fast and dirty version of how these things are created. So every character that I've ever made, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. So there are books, for example, not this one, but there are many books behind me that say, here's a stock female adult marionette pattern, here's a stock male, here's a stock child. And I know many people who make the same bodies for their whole career from those patterns and change the heads. So what I do is I work in a system called counterbalancing. So every character is drawn, I don't know if you can see that very well, full size on just brown craft paper.
I have to interrupt you for 1 second.
Yes, I'm not showing.
No, it's perfect. Just have to say one thing. Just to make sure you guys understand. That, of course, is his drawing. He does the drawings. When I saw Providence, there was this enormous oil painting behind him. He did the oil painting. I thought it was like some professional artist. No, it's Ronnie. He had to learn how to oil paint also. No problem. He just does all this shit. Continue, sir. Just have to say.
So counterbalancing, guys, is what I learned from this guy, Martin Stevens, at the age of 12. And what it is you design every character based upon a central line of gravity. So if it's an old character that you want to be in this position, what you do is you figure out the weight distribution, and on the profile, you build all of your key joints on that line, and then the shoulder strings that hold the puppet suspended are on that line. So what I'm building is actually a machine or an instrument that's responsive that I don't have to fight with. you know, a lot of people will say that marionette had 40 strings. It must be the best marionette ever. If a puppet has 40 strings, half of them are holding it in place. It's a shit marionette, actually. You don't need 40 strings. So what counterbalancing does is, like Penny or any other character, I animate it, I bring it out, it moves around, but when I hold it at rest, gravity returns it to a characteristic stance that I've built in. So Penny Plain always has this jutting head off this curved back. I don't have to string it into that. The thing is built to do that. So I'm building a machine that I don't have to fight with unless the arm gets stuck like Lloyd's that night. So from there, we make patterns, and then we cut it out of wood, and then I carve it, and then I sculpt the head, and then we make a mold, and then we cast the heads, and that's probably a full year. And then someone comes in and costumes it. So, sorry, Penny, I mean, just on a leg, there's a hip joint, there's a knee joint, there's an ankle joint. Then you have to figure out the stringing. Does she want to pick her foot up when she walks? Yes, she does. So how do you do that? The arms are the same. The middle is the same. It took me 20 years to figure out my mentor's neck joint, because in the 30s and 40s, he did religious dramas with marionettes in really naturalistic style. So Joan of Arc, Cleopatra, the Passion Play with marionettes. And he was also the randiest, drunkenest horn boy you'd ever meet. So it was weird that he was doing this great religious theater with marionettes, and he was actually a pig. But anyway, he had a neck joint that a clockmaker designed, and it was all gear, and it went inside the head. It took me 20 years to figure out how to make that with a piece of wire and a piece of dowel. So Penny actually benefits from that. So she has a full rotation, but the head also is built to stop exactly where I want it to stop, so it doesn't over rotate. So it's like any instrument. You want it to do what it's supposed to do, and not all the other stuff. So that's how that, I can't actually pull the control down for you, because Penny Plain, I was up so high on bridges, because the show previous to Penny Plain was a show Kevin mentioned called Billy Twinkle, Requiem for a Golden Boy, which was about a middle-aged puppeteer who's going to throw himself off a cruise ship, and his dead mentor comes back and makes him relive his life as a puppet show. And I played Billy. So I was down there in the central action for the whole play with a hand puppet on my head, dragging me around, beating me. There was a great scene where we had a Shakespeare off, and we're yelling lines from Macbeth to each other while he's beating me up and dragging me up the staircase. Which, like, where did that come from? I just one day thought that was really funny. I thought I'd love to have a hand puppet drag me around the set while yelling Shakespeare at me. But the thing about Billy Twinkle is, for the 2, maybe 3 years I toured it, I was so front and center. And I thought, for the next one, I want to get out of the way. I want the puppets to do the work. And I don't want it to be about look at me all the time. So the strings for Penny Plain are 100 inches long. So she's still even on her winder thing. So I've unwind. So I can't actually manipulate her. But there was one scene in Penny Plain where I called attention to myself. And it's a flashback of Penny as a young girl talking about how she, the day she became blind, which was trauma blindness. And so I did it with hand puppets, and the lights come up and I do the whole scene. It's a dog and it's a little girl. Do you want me to read some of this, Kevin?
Hells yes.
It's okay. I haven't read this in a few years, guys. So it's off. So and I think there was a shot of this. So there's a scene of me with child Penny and her dog Big Boy. So I just want to see if, I don't think I need to read the whole thing. I'll just pick it up. There's a whole thing about Wizard of Oz and whatever. So this girl, all limbs and laughter, climbing barefoot up the tree, her brother barking below, limbs like branches grasping the fruit, fat red Melbas, too many to hold, falling from the sky. Well, Big Boy danced with glee, or was it concern? Worry for me. Come down, little sister, come back to earth, he barked. And I fell too, rolling on the grass like apples free at last. A perfect autumn day, my big boy and me under an apple tree in 1939. So many apples tossed to the ground. Oh, my thriftless, thoughtless play and unconscious rebellion against the hunger, the want, the barren years before. So many apples, too many on the ground, oh, too many in my belly. And soon, oh, the pain, the cramping ache inside, coiling me into a moaning ball under that tree. And he, big boy, sounding the alarm, crying, come help, she's in pain. And so gently, so lovingly, taking my leg into his soft mouth and starting to tug, trying to pull me home, a wailing girl flailing against his wisdom and better sense. You know, across the field beyond the fence, my father heard the barking and my bawling, but all he could see was Big Boy pulling as I cried, pulling as I resisted his kindness, pulling as too many apples cidered inside me. My father ran so fast, too fast, like a younger man with hope in his heels, reaching us as though winged on that perfect breezy day. He grabbed Big Boy roughly, not the way a man should treat his son, but manhandled him like a dog, scruff of the neck, dragging him across the field. Not a human word. Only the protestations of an old dog. She's ill, she's sick, help her, can't you see? He whimpered as his paws were torn against the ground. My father, deaf to dog words, but clearly heard by me. I struggled to my feet and saw my father, now small again and far away, standing at the barn, shouldering his gun, pointed at the ground. Why? Why kill the earth? What was there? Nothing but Big Boy, cowering. I tried to run, I tried to scream, but I could do nothing at all but watch the last thing I would ever see forever. My old Big Boy suddenly red, like apples covering the ground. Too many apples, too much red, red everywhere as my brother dog lay dead. And when I finally screamed, the sky turned black. The sun turned its back and burned away, and the stars fell to earth, and all light disappeared forever. They said I screamed for days, I don't recall. They said the blindness was hysteria and would not last. They were wrong. I had seen enough and sealed my future, present and past, there in the apple field Eden that became hell one perfect, awful autumn day. When Dorothy went home in that movie from 1939, it was back to sepia, the color of urine and dung. Someone should have told her to stay in Oz, where villains are green and easy to spot, and where people dance down golden roads. Poor Dorothy. I hope she was able to close her eyes and see the colors of Oz. So that's that section.
Yeah. Well, you know, he just drops in there like it's nothing. But, I mean, imagine as he calls it, you know, like he throws it out like it's no big deal, a trauma blindness because of the witnessing what she witnessed and having the emotions that she had. She loses her sight from a combination of the trauma and to a certain degree, choice. And she says, I've seen enough. I mean, this, and then he invents her, and look at her. Look at this woman's face. He invented this. He's not copying somebody else's crap. He invented that. But he wrote that. I mean, I just don't know what to say. Which brings me to
I want to tell you about this though, because this was the second show I painted with oils. I paint in oils now. I hate acrylic paints, but and there's never enough time. And we'd worked in my studio here in Toronto, a previous studio, for a year. But of course, the play was premiering in Edmonton, Alberta, at a really big regional theater. They built the set. We had the luxury of the set on stage to rehearse on for 3 weeks. You never get to be on stage in an empty theater on the actual set for 3 weeks. The downside was the puppets weren't finished. So my whole team had to go work in dressing rooms behind the stage. And these heads, which were painted with oils, there were probably 37 or 40 puppets in Penny Plain. They were all painted in my hotel room without ventilation and solvents. So it ain't so glamorous all the time. So this head was actually painted in a hotel room, as were all the others. Because the thing about the arts is there's an opening night, there's a deadline. You got to get there, you know. You had a question, Kevin. Go.
Well, my next one is one of the most important tropes that has come up, and I keep hammering everybody with this because I know how difficult it is and I know how important it is. I remember you telling us early on, it was like, no, it shouldn't be this way. You can't do this. And then you had to do your own thing. And everybody told you were wrong about Forget Me Not. And then you did that. And then I wonder if you can talk to us about the nature of risk and courage and what it means to go your own way in general. I mean, I can't imagine you doing any of these things that you've done without going your own way. But we work in a profession that is so rigid about, you have to do this. If you're going to be a teacher, you do this. If you're going to be an orchestral player, you do this. If you think you're going to be a soloist, you do this. If you're going to, everybody's got a little plan, and you get in line and you do the thing.
Right.
And I have often felt that this was the very recipe for artistic disaster. This was like the one thing that you couldn't do was just get in line. And I guess I'm wondering, have you felt most of your life has been a series of like, probably shouldn't do that. Oh, I'm definitely going to do that. Like, have you, the risk of all of it and the willingness to step out on your own and strike new ground. Can you just talk about a little bit about that part of the journey and how hard that has been for you? Or has it been easy to just go, that's me, I'm doing it, to hell with everybody else, boom,
I think to an external eye and to a true extent, uh, uh, it would look like I've had a successful career. My view of success is different than the external eye's view, but I've had a wonderful life through this. But I will tell you, regardless of how I'm viewed, it has been risky the entire time. And there is not one day in my adult life that I haven't worried about money. Not one day, because I'm not just me building puppets. I think a lot of people forget this. I'm running a theater company, and I don't have a general manager, and I don't have a receptionist, and I don't have a guy who cleans the bathroom. I actually clean the studio too. And I get the accounting together for taxes and blah, blah, blah. I have an agent. I have collaborators I've worked with on and off over the years. The same person has made the clothes for 32 years now. She's as family to me as you can get. But it is a one-man show. But I never wanted to join the orchestra, meaning the theater as it was presented to me. And I wrote something a few years ago, and I said, with a bag of puppets, a one-man band becomes an orchestra. And so even though I didn't want to join the orchestra, I actually have, in the Daisy Theater, currently we have 57 puppets for me to choose from, and I'm still making puppets for them. I'm sure in 5 years, the Daisy will have over 100 puppets for me to grab during any performance. But it has all been a risk. But I go to bed with an idea every night, and I wake up with an idea every morning, and that's the curse. I've always thought if I go to sleep over a long period of time without an idea, that's retirement probably, or whatever that is called. But no matter how much I've worried and risked during the day, I go to bed thinking, oh, a cow named Vilma Abattoir who only sings songs about the moon. And then I fucking giggle myself to sleep, and I'm like, I got to get up and make Vilma Abattoir, and then talk to John about how many songs have blue moon, like how many songs in the American Songbook have moon in it. Well, probably 8,000. So I'm cursed by the idea. I'm in service to the muse. I have never met the muse. I've smelt the muse and sensed the muse, but I can only answer it by, COVID happened, no work, theaters are closed. This time last year, I watched 2 years of bookings just evaporate. So out of the blue in the late summer and fall, I get interest from a large television production house. Would I like to go do a TV series for 4 months? And they made me an offer. And in the 11th hour, in December, I declined going to Calgary during a pandemic to do 4 months working for Henson shooting the new Fraggle Rock. I should be there doing that right now and making a fortune.
Can I just say, yeah.
But I have 4 ideas in my head, and I really wanted to stay here and build Wonderful Joe, Peep Show, Sideshow, Little Willie, and the Looney Bin. Those are the 4 shows. I was more committed, and so I took a risk financially, you guys. I really, at this age, don't want to work for someone else. Here's the thing about, you're all so young. So you're in act 1. Nobody does a 3-act play anymore, but let's go with the fact that maybe it's a 3-act play. You're in act 1. Oh my God, you're making your entrances. What's happening? That's the funny one. That's the sexy one. Act 2 is when you get the bulk of your career. That's the peanut butter and jam. That's the meat and potatoes. That's when you're working. That's when you're feeling hot. I'm essentially in act 3 of a career, and it's going to be the longest 3rd act in history. But I feel like all the work I've done got me here, and now I just feel on the verge of knowing what I do and why I've been doing it. On the verge. I'm not there yet, but I can smell it. It's like, Ronnie, you got to push through and see where that takes you. And that's a risk too, because my audiences like a certain thing from me. And on the last show, I took that away from them. I asked them to engage with me differently. I asked them to be physically in the space with me, moving around. I asked them to do things. A lot of people don't like that. So I took at least 25 years of one style of work that the audience came to love and said, you're not getting that tonight. In fact, I'm going to ask a bunch of you. Well, I'm going to do that again. Not to be mean, but because I trust them and I love the audience so much. And I think, well, why wouldn't we have that journey together? Why wouldn't we? So risk, it's hard. It's really hard having a singular vision.
I got to just jump on this. I just want to make sure everybody's clear on this, because I'm so glad you threw in the Henson example, because I want to make it clear to everybody that quite a number of years ago, Ronnie was already considered a national Canadian treasure. I'm sure he had many opportunities to do television or film or other kinds of things. They could have done this other stuff, but it wouldn't have allowed him to do the thing that he does if it would take him away from this work. And so here's this guy who is this national Canadian treasure that has won their equivalent of the Oscars or the Tony Awards or whatever you want to call it many times over. And yet he is telling us right now he's worried about money every day of his life. And he didn't have to make that choice. He could have gone another way, but he didn't. And I know there's got to be one of you in this group today. There's got to be one that is just drilling into your soul about who you are, what your role is, about the kind of life in the arts that you want to make. And there are models. There aren't many, but there are people like Ronnie who go their own way and do their own thing. And almost invariably, those are the people in the end who make the highest impact, because they were willing to hang it out there. They were willing to invest all of who they were. The second thing I have to say is this is a person who, in my opinion, has mastered all aspects of his craft. And yet here he is at his age saying, I've almost figured out who I am and what my work should be, but not quite. Man, that's art. That's the life you guys signed up for. Unless you signed up for playing in the back of the orchestra and getting your paycheck and bitching about the union around the water cooler. Because that's what a lot of people do. If you want that, have it. But if you want to be in a moment that you can see, Ronnie describes it as crack, when you and the audience together breathe as one, you're not going to get there around the water cooler complaining about the union. That ain't going to happen. You're going to get there with risk. You're going to get there with sacrifice. You're going to get there by never believing you've quite gotten there. This man, I know, on his deathbed, will not say, yep, I did it. I did my thing. I figured it out. He'll say, "Oh, I was so close. I was right around the corner from having the final thing that I really wanted to do," which of course would then evolve and become something else. This is a life in the arts. This is why I consider him a mentor. Okay, I'm opening up for some questions from anybody that would like to ask. I have about a billion more that I could ask, but I want to give you some time to chime in. So put your hand up if you have a question for Ronnie, and let's go there. Let me open that so I can see everybody.
Or not.
No, they do. Emily, is that your
Okay.
hand? Yeah. Let's do that. Let's start with Emily.
Hey, Emily.
Yeah.
Hello. Thank you so much for sharing everything today. I think this is like make Emily cry week for orchestra because I've like just been crying my eyes out on Monday and today with everything you've said. So I just had a question. I remember you saying that you had a voice and a character in mind when you were building the puppet itself. I was wondering if, or I guess how evolved or concrete your ideas are when you are creating the set and everything like that, just because it's so sophisticated and how many things that go into it. Like, are your characters and storylines set before you start building, or how does that?
Great question. Great question. So here's how the process works. And I did switch one part of this, but it took me years to figure out. Kevin, remind me to tell the story about definition of a puppet that I told you last night.
Yes,
but,
that's on my list.
Because the show takes a year to build, and that's before rehearsal. So, you know, and that's 16 hours a day. I work every day. Not everybody works every day, but, you know, I come in and work on Sundays, and I live upstairs in the apartment upstairs. So it's really easy to come to work, and it's impossible to escape it. But during the year of building, like molding and casting heads takes like a couple of months, and it gets boring because we work like a factory. We do all the heads at once, all the bodies at once, all the legs. I joint all the knees at once. So it's like boring mass production for a year. But what happens is, because I worked with a dramaturg for 20 years, who was a dear friend named Iris Turcotte, what happens is the script gets a first reading at the beginning of that, and it's a bad script. Usually the first draft is literally thrown in the wastebasket. But I do a reading for about 20 people just to hear it. And then we have, or we've had a few days of dramaturgical workshops before it, then there's the reading. A couple months later, there'll be a reading for 60 people, which always had the workshop before, which at this point, the composer is in on that. It's the composer, the dramaturg, and me are the three, and stage manager usually. And then there's a third reading for 100 people. Then there's historically, I've done a lot of, it's so weird, in Vancouver and Calgary and Edmonton, theaters will ask me to do a reading for 300 or 400 people, and it's a fundraiser for something, and people pay like $20 to come watch a guy read a puppet script on stage. But they come, and I have a bigger audience to gauge the stuff by, and we're building the show throughout. So I could come back from every workshop and every public reading of the text, which is constantly changing and getting cut and edited and added to over the year. That affects the build, absolutely. Usually I don't have the set designed in the first two readings, you know, so it's all evolving, and then I have to stop everything and take 3 weeks and design the set model finally, because it has to be built and all of that stuff. So it is one giant process rolling over itself. The only thing that I changed, I think on the last show for sure, yeah, it was only on the last show, we used to do the workshop with the composer and the stage manager, me and the dramaturg, and then do a public reading. What we switched on Forget Me Not, I went, this is the wrong way. We should do the reading first, see how it lands, see what I'm hearing in my own ear, what my team is hearing, and then have a workshop and go, yeah, people didn't react to that. You thought that was hysterical, Ronnie. Nobody laughed at that, or they laughed at this and it shouldn't be. So we now do it differently. Read first, workshop after. And so there's that.
Just to make it manifest, is everybody clear then that his answer to Emily's question means that without the audience's influence, he cannot even build the puppets. He can't even finish the vision. He takes the ideas, he watches how the audience breathes and reacts to what he's doing, and that informs whether things are working or not. He redrafts, and then he gradually begins to build characters based in part on whether or not the audience is or is not breathing with him. I mean, this
I'll
is
tell you,
this is what art is to me.
on Forget Me Not, you didn't see this. We did this in the second and third runs, Kevin. But on Forget Me Not, I wrote the first draft, and the dramaturg, my stage manager, my workshop assistant, and John the composer came. I read it to them, and the advantage of having an audience even of 4 and me reading out loud is I go, oh, whoa, that stinks. That really stinks. I read it aloud when I wrote it, and it was really emotional. But I wrote it at 4 a.m. and it was alone, and I thought it was a genius. But no, that stinks. And you can see your collaborators' faces falling, just going, oh my God, we have an opening day and this is the crap we're doing. Oh my God. Usually the first draft is totally thrown away. And that first workshop is so necessary for me to go, no, because it tells me what I wanted to do and how I got away from what I wanted to do. But after that, after the second draft didn't work, I changed the mechanics of how I wrote a script. And it was a play about love letters being written in cursive hand. And that this character, who was a little marionette, but this character, this crone, was the last person who read and wrote cursive. So if you wanted a love letter, you had to find her to write your love letter. And then you would make an epic journey to deliver it to your beloved, who also couldn't read it. So they had to make an epic journey to find her again to read the love letter to them. And I thought, well, it's a play about cursive writing. So I got a pad of yellow foolscap, lined yellow foolscap, a box of good pens, and I sat exactly at this table and I wrote longhand cursive for 186 pages. And the script emerged because it was in the style of the play, and you don't edit yourself. I had no thesaurus, no dictionary, none of those tools were allowed. It was just write, scratch out, right. So what we did in Australia and Vancouver is that we had these carnival lights strung all over the place. I had the crew string 186 lines from the ceiling, and we clipped the pages of the original handwritten script above, and it just danced and moved over the audience throughout the whole show. And it was really interesting as people were moving about, sometimes just watching someone go, that's the script.
I mean, okay. Does that answer your question, Emily? I mean, that's a bigger answer than I could have imagined. Nick, all right, you're up, my friend.
Hey, Nick, I can actually see Nick. Look at you, Nick.
Nick is one of my graduate conducting students.
I'm just in awe of this. Professor Dove's always said you're like the greatest artist, and I'm seeing it all. So thank you for being here. I had a question about storytelling, since that's really what you're doing. What have you found the benefits are to storytelling through puppets that we might not get in theater, film, music, right, sculpture, whatever it is?
Well, I think, Nick, that's a really interesting question, and that's part of I might figure that out someday. But where I sit with that right now is certainly for a solo performer, as I addressed earlier, the puppets allow me to be not just this thing that the real theater would hire this as a certain kind of actor, So there's the first benefit. The second benefit is the puppet exists only to be this, like I have favorite actors, certainly theatrical actors here in the country, but I know that every time I go, like to Stratford to see so-and-so when she makes her entrance, I always go, oh, there's Martha. I love her so much. And she was so great in that last year. And okay, and she's now this, right? Or she's got a great wig. They gave her a really good wig. So it's this thing, the audience doesn't have any of that connection with. It exists just to be Penny Plain. So let's start filling that in right away with the storytelling. So it's not, in a weird way, bound by human references. The third thing that I think is interesting, and I've only started thinking about this just because of younger puppeteers that I'm associated with, and I'm surrounded by younger puppeteers, which thrills me. And there is a new conversation, there's new language, not new ideas, but we live in a hashtag culture and an identity culture. And, my last studio assistant started transitioning and being non-binary and gender fluid and identifying with that stuff. So I was learning language and learning all of that in our discussions. And I remember they were leaving one day, it was the end of the workday, and they were leaving. And I said, it struck me that unbeknownst to me, I have been gender fluid my entire life since the age of 7, because I play old ladies and Rapunzel and the witch and Juliet in Romeo and Juliet. And it never crossed my mind that was an identity thing. It was just what the craft allowed me to do. And it seemingly was natural to me. So I think there are many benefits to the puppet for the right person. Certainly when you're creating, the question is always, could human actors do this better? Why are we doing something that should be of the human theater? But in Penny Plain, for example, I had dogs that walked around and talked. So certainly puppets can do that quite well. And we're used to animal puppets. And if I do something that's seemingly actors could do it, then I have to stage it in a way that says, no, only puppets could do this, Yeah.
I
Does that help, Nick?
It did. Thank you. That's awesome.
Okay.
I find as an audience member in many of your productions that the puppets can say things. They can get away with things that a human just couldn't do. Their ability to look at us and say something that just emotionally harpoons us, just like right through the chest, is, for some reason, there is an unvarnished rawness. It's like I am more willing to hear it from the puppet than I would be from a person. I don't want to hear that from a person. I need them to say it to me. And somehow when they say it to me, I can't block it. It's like, I don't want to go there. I want to keep the emotion at bay, but you cannot hide from these puppets.
Well, I want to say something too that I hadn't thought of before, but it's true, especially to younger artists. When I started Theater of Marionettes, I'd already been a puppeteer for 15 years. I did everything that I was told was a career in puppetry. No one, not anyone ever said, oh, and you can go do adult marionette plays and talk. None of my mentors said, oh, and you could do that. You'll be considered an actor. You'll be a playwright. No. So I did all the stuff that was expected of me. But when I started Theater of Marionettes, I thought, I am going to put the puppet back on the legitimate stage. I'm getting it back into the legitimate theater. And it was actually a bit easier than I thought, because I'm Canadian and the Canadian theater was really lovely to me in the early days. And so I got my ass on those stages. And the stages kept getting bigger and bigger. Kevin mentioned the Kennedy Center. And I remember I was playing an 800-seat theater, and I realized the audience can't see the face of the puppet. And there was an orchestra pit, and then the audience, and I couldn't smell the audience. And I mean that really. I love the smell of an audience. And I said to my agent, we're not playing, we're going smaller. And the shows started getting smaller. The Daisy Theater, Kevin, smaller, 200 seaters. Forget me not, 100 people at a time, no more. Because I am at a point where if I don't have intimacy with the audience, knowing they can see the thing, then it's a failure. I don't want to play an 800 or a 12. I played 1,200 seaters in Europe, thinking I have legitimized my craft. No, I just got to a certain area. But what I realized is, at the core of my craft and of my love of this craft is, I'm a Punch and Judy man. And Punch and Judy men 200-300 years ago were run out of town. They were the bad boys. They were the ones hanging the priest, beating up the police officer. And they were so everyman for a populist audience. And I thought, Ronnie, get your head out of your ass. Be Punch and Judy man again. And that's what Kevin's talking about. They do get away with murder, literally sometimes, because they exist only to be those characters.
Fairly satisfying answer, friends. Would you share with us the little thing you told me to remind you about the definition of a puppet? Because I want to say again, of the many tropes, I just keep bringing us back to the audience, which we tend to forsake, and Ronnie never does. And so he told me this quote that I want to have him share with you again today.
When I was, and I know we're past time already, so okay. I won't go on for 20 minutes.
Anybody can go that needs to, and I'll just hang out with you for the rest of my life. No problem.
So when I was 12, again, 12 was a big year, and Martin Stevens and I were in each other's lives. he said, "What's your definition of art?" And I actually said to him, "I don't know. I'm 12." And that was my answer. And he said, "Well, I'm going to lend you mine until you come up with your own." And his definition of art was, and I don't know where he got it from. I've been trying to look for this. So if you find it, let me know. He said, "Art is the personal contribution to the ever continuing conversation about life." Isn't that a humdinger? It means you just have to make your own contribution to an ongoing conversation. It doesn't mean I figured it out and this is how it is. Art is the personal contribution to the ever continuing conversation about life. I have never found a better definition of art. But then that old motherfucker turns around and says to me, "What's your definition of a puppet?" And I was like, he said, "I'll give you mine until you figure out a better one." And I used this for decades. And his definition was, a puppet is the shape of an idea in motion. It satisfies all three, right? The shape, the physical thing, the idea, the conceit of the show Penny Plain, that's the idea. Motion is the performance. Shape, idea in motion. Used that for years, taught that for years. And about 5 years ago, I went, that's missing something. So I abridged his definition, and it's now my version. A puppet is the shape of an idea in motion, witnessed.
Witnessed. Boom.
By an audience. Yeah. Because we can all sit in our practice rooms and jerk off. And you know what I mean by that. Or we can take the risk. I think
we all do. I just wish you hadn't said it, but fair enough.
Sorry, did I trigger somebody? Am
No,
I canceled now?
We're cool.
I should have said wank because that's British.
You're a guest. You have your own rules.
All right. Please don't cancel me. I've been canceled 3 times this year.
Okay.
But you know what I mean? I mean, you can be brilliant on your own. I could sit in this room. I could go buy a 6-pack of beer, drink 4 of them, and convince myself I'm a freaking national hero and I'm a treasure. I could, and a genius, you know. And it's so funny to hear the word genius because I've been called that a lot in the press. And that's very nice, you would think, except I call it I'm a genius, but because critics will use the word genius in a really snarly way to say, it's well understood that Mr. Burkett is a genius, but. And I've always said, if I'm a freaking genius, don't put the but in there.
That's right.
Anyway, I could go on all day, and I'm sure you all have to pee. Anything else?
Any other questions, guys? He was being really generous, so if you guys want to stick around, you can. If somebody else has a question. Let me make sure I can see all the hands. I gotta get my gallery open. Anybody got your hand up that wants to ask?
I just have a lot to process now.
I hope we all do. I mean,
I have a question.
Yes, please, Anna.
I was thinking about your relationships with your puppets. Do you have any favorites?
I do. And I have favorites. That's a great question because of what I consider the holy trinity of what makes a great puppet. It is the physical thing. Does the machine work well? Because no matter how much I build a thing into, there are just some puppets that respond. It might be their weight, it might be their height. And so that's one element. And then there's the character. What is that character? Do I love it? Is that in the Daisy Theater, there are 3 characters that I call equal parts of me. There's Schnitzel, who's a 14-inch tall little fairy who dreams of flying. And that is a part of my hopefulness that I could never convincingly play on a stage because I'm an old white guy. And people would go, yeah, whatever. The second one is a character named Esme Mazengill, who is a bitter, drunken, faded, abusive, vulgar former showgirl whose entrance is flat on her face every night because she's drunk. And that's an equal part of me. That's Ronnie, who's been on the road 45 years and has just about had it with your shit audiences. And then there's Edna Rural, who's the farm lady who sits in a chair every night and talks. And that is the Canadian version of me, because a true Canadian is confused all the time. And, you know, I say about Edna Rural, she'll give you the shirt off her back and then criticize you for not having a shirt of your own. You know, so that's kind of what being Canadian is. But I would say Schnitzel, Edna, and Esme are my 3 favorites because they satisfy that combination of machine, character, and the third part, here we go again, how does the audience react to those characters? So if there's an engagement from the audience, there's a puppet behind me here, Bongo. He's strapped to the thing. Bongo was in a show called Happy, and he was going to be the greatest puppet I'd ever built. He's a beautiful puppet. And he did the first run of the show, and I wrote him out. He just didn't work. The audience didn't like him. I got him out there, didn't like him. Somebody offered me a lot of money for him a few weeks ago when I showed him on Instagram, but it's just like, he's a beautifully built and designed puppet, but me and the audience together just went, no. So I don't think of them as like, seriously, Penny is out just for this. There are no puppets of mine in this entire studio. They're all in the morgue downstairs in Rubbermaid crates. I don't want to see them. I don't greet them in the morning and talk to them. They live in here as characters. And then they are realized through the machine. So I also don't want to look at puppets that I've already built when I'm making new work. I don't want to be informed by what I did already. I want a clean space to just see what I'm seeing in front of me. So I don't know if that answers your question, Anna, but I do have favorites, but it's that thing again of being witnessed. I have to take that thing out into public and see if it's going to be everybody's favorite character. And I think Kevin can tell you, Schnitzel is pretty much everybody's favorite character.
Schnitzel's everybody's favorite. It's impossible not to love Schnitzel. Ronnie, Professor Jen Waldy, who's our professor of violin, has a question. He's asking about Wino Films, and I assume what he means is, why haven't you allowed, say, full productions to be filmed and released in that way? Because of course, all of us now want to run out and like watch a whole Ronnie show, and we can't. And I get it, but I just want you to have a chance to respond to that. Again, this is another way many artists would do it. They would monetize it. They would do this. This is just another one of the tough decisions that he makes. But tell us why.
Because I think you saw on the Clips Kevin show, it doesn't work. The minute these are theatrical instruments. The minute you put a camera on, and I've done years of television puppetry, so I know how to make puppets for film and television. The minute you put a camera on this, all you see is the mouth doesn't move. It looks jerky. I see the strings. If you're in a theater with a lighting design and some distance, it's a different thing. It has an elegance to it. And I can also, through the lighting designer and I having a collaboration, make you look exactly where you're supposed to look. The color of the lighting design can change the emotional impact of the words and the journey of the characters. So this is all theater work. And I personally am not one of those people who likes watching the National Theater stream. I know that happens. I know there's great stuff. I know there's been a ton of free opera this year and it saved a lot of people. I want to be in the room. So that's just a personal choice. But we used to, at the beginning of Theater of Marionettes, my agent and I spent thousands and thousands of dollars making promotional videos to send out to presenters. And we never got one booking off it because it just looked like a damn puppet show. There was no, well, what makes this special? There was no what Kevin experienced when he came cynically to tear me down. And then he leaves going, I'm a convert. So that's why it doesn't exist in that form. It just doesn't translate at all.
And I know it seems obvious to say it, but just remember, these are three-dimensional puppets, which when you're in the space, you can really appreciate. You can appreciate the way the neck is hung and the way they jangle. You feel it. You can hear their little feet on the stage. You can, and you just, you don't get any of this, which of course is related to my work with binaural technology and kind of immersive sound and recordings that I'm doing. I'm trying to do that same thing. I'm trying to get music not to be this postage stamp stuck on the stage at a distance, but to be something that surrounds the audience. And I'm finding my way closer and closer to it. So I think there's some parallel there. I'm just obviously not nearly as smart or as talented. Joe, does that help? Yeah.
And that might not be the truth or right answer. That's just a personal view of the work. So, and the other thing is, because there is a record, all the scripts have been published. So it's odd that when I came into puppetry, it was all these books. Obviously, this is the greatest love of my life, are these books, since I was 7 years old, and collecting them on every tour and finding them in some weird city or whatever. But I assumed there were all these puppet scripts when I started out. And I, like a young artist would, I thought, they're in Europe. Europe must have tons of puppet scripts for adults. Well, Europe didn't. So I think the thing I'm leaving my craft is part of the thing I love. At least all the scripts are published because it's text-based work.
Many of these scripts he's talking about are available right now on Amazon. If you're interested, you can find some of these things on Amazon.
They're cheaper through Playwrights Canada Press, actually. If you go directly to Playwrights Canada Press, they're cheaper there.
And he has one called String Quartet, which includes 4 different plays. And what are the 4 that are in it?
Tinker's New Dress, Street of Blood, Happy, and Provenance are in there.
Yeah, the 3 before Provenance I didn't see because I didn't know who Ronnie was until then. But everything since Provenance I've seen, except his Charles Dickens play called A Little Dickens, which that's gonna be brought back, and I'm gonna get to see it in the next run.
Yeah.
So, any other questions, you guys? I really hope that all of you are going with me on this journey of that all these arts are related to what we do, that it's not some separate thing. It's not, oh, that's what a puppeteer does, but I play the violin. I just really hope that you're taking this stuff to heart. You know, when you get out of school, unless you are one of the most fortunate people alive, your ability to surround yourself with people like this, ideas outside of the box, ideas that are outside of the purview of your daily routine, is going to get smaller. The responsibility of life is going to narrow the amount of time that you have for this kind of exposure. And I just hope that you're all drinking it in right now. If it's worked, I won't hear much of anything from you guys for a few years. But what usually happens is that you graduate, and then, like, it's often one of you who I thought was totally asleep. Like somebody, I'm pretend I don't know who it is. But some kid that I'm like, man, that kid was asleep for 5 years in orchestra. Failed 1 year, I assume. Asleep, never paid attention to anything that we said or did. Never gave me the right time of day. Thought Professor No was an idiot. And then 12 years later, I get this email that just pours their heart out. Oh my God, it's all clicked. I finally learned so much. I'm doing this thing. I'm now playing on Broadway, or I'm doing this other thing, and it's all because of this, and I'm so sorry. I was such a douchebag, and I didn't appear to pay attention. But quietly, I was listening, and these things have all come together. I bet you Professor Ginewaldi knows this feeling as well, where people like later on come back and go, oh my gosh, I realize now how much I've learned, and etc. So all I can say is I believe in what we're doing this year, and I believe in this mass exposure to all these different ideas, and I hope that there's at least one of you who feels like this got to you tonight and it changed you in some way. And if you think this is time wasted because we're not just in rehearsal with me bitching about subdividing, you are wrong, my friend. This is the stuff right here. This is when you're becoming your own artist. It's happening right now, whether you know it or not. And I'm inviting you to grab that moment, seize it, and run with it, and be your own badass self. We need you. You, Anna. You, Anya. You, Sam. You, Jacob. We need you. We do not need copies of somebody that already was here. We need you. You have a unique voice, but you have to have courage to express it, and you have to have craft if you're going to do it well. And it takes time. This man, believe it or not, is even older than I am. I know that seems impossible, but he is. And he's still saying, I'm on the verge of figuring out what I'm doing. Don't forget this stuff. I promise you, 30 years I've been a professor. This is where it's at. And yes, you also need to go in the practice room and practice that shift over and over and over. You need to do all of these things. But don't think for 1 second that your life and career in the arts is going to be handed to you. It will not. You will either direct it and take it yourself, or you will passively fall into something. You can't be that. You can't be that in the arts. Ronnie, I can't thank you enough. Can we unmute and just show this generous artist a little love? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ronnie,
Thanks.
I will look forward to our next chat. Thank you, everybody, so much for your time today. Have a good one.
Yeah.
I'll post it. Weimar, good to see
Stay
you.
safe.
I just have a super quick thing. It's
Oh,
not
please.
a question.
Please.
Okay. Hi, Ronnie. I'm Anya. I'm
Hi,
a
Anya.
conducting student here at UMKC. This is not related to your craft, which I have so many thoughts to unpack about. I taught middle school band in Lloydminster, Alberta. So every time you said Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, because I haven't been able to go home, right? Because of the
Right.
borders. And I'm just like, oh, I love it. People are
I
saying
knew-
my places.
I knew that
Yeah.
not only I knew that you were maybe born Russian, but I kept hearing this Canadian accent when you say "oat" every time. And I'm like, she's got to be a Canuck. I know it.
Yeah.
So there you go.
So
Yeah,
it just
Nice
made
to
me feel a
meet
little
you.
bit more at home. So thank you for that.
good.
Okay.
Stay safe, everyone.
Bye, friends.
I'm out.
It's a pleasure.